We're going to be bringing the president's remarks in just a moment. The first major military strike of the Trump administration has taken place. Dozens of cruise missiles, 50 to 60 we're told in all, from a pair of Navy warships striking a single Syrian air base. That's the preliminary information. Now, the one suspected of the base is the one suspected of launching this week's poison attack that took so many lives in Idlib province. We are just about to receive a statement, a videotape statement that the president made just a short time ago, a few minutes ago, from his vacation home in Mar-a-Lago, where he had originally gathered to meet the leader of China. He's there with his national security team. The launch, and let's listen.
On Tuesday, Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad launched a horrible chemical weapons attack on innocent civilians. Using a deadly nerve agent, Assad choked out the lives of helpless men, women, and children. It was a slow and brutal death for so many. Even beautiful babies were cruelly murdered in this very barbaric attack. No child of God should ever suffer such horror. Tonight I ordered a targeted military strike on the airfield in Syria from where the chemical attack was launched. It is in this vital national security interest of the United States to prevent and deter the spread and use of deadly chemical weapons. There can be no dispute that Syria used banned chemical weapons, violated its obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention, and ignored the urging of the UN Security Council. Years of previous attempts at changing Assad's behavior have all failed, and failed very dramatically. As a result, the refugee crisis continues to deepen, and the region continues to destabilize, threatening the United States and its allies. Tonight I call on all civilized nations to join us in seeking to end the slaughter and bloodshed in Syria, and also to end terrorism of all kinds and all types. We ask for God's wisdom as we face the challenge of our very troubled world. We pray for the lives of the wounded and for the souls of those who have passed. And we hope that as long as America stands for justice, then peace and harmony will, in the end, prevail. Good night, and God bless America and the entire world. Thank you.
That was Donald Trump speaking just a few moments ago from Mar-a-Lago. If you are just joining us, it is the top of the hour. The president ordered a launch of 50 to 60 Tomahawk cruise missiles from two Navy ships in the eastern Mediterranean. We're told the impact time was around 8:45 p.m. Eastern time, U.S. time, targeting the Shariat Air Base, which the president said was the launching pad for the attack, which took place Tuesday in Syria last week, which killed so many. The president has just said that there's no dispute that Syria used banned chemical weapons. He also said that years of previous attempts at changing Assad's behavior have failed, and he talked about this has continued to destabilize the country, led to the refugee crisis, which he says has threatened the United States. We are joined by our complete military panel, General Mark Hertling, Colonel Rick Francona, Admiral John Kirby, David Axelrod is joining us, Gloria Borger as well, General James Spider Marks is joining us as well. General Marks, if you would, you're at the board. If you could just kind of show us, you're at the map of Syria, kind of just explain a little bit of where this base is, where the attack took place, and the significance from your vantage point.
Yeah, absolutely, Anderson. As you can see right here, this is the air base as has been described already. But what's really significant is we know that in the Eastern Med, the pre-positioned ships launched those 60 Tomahawks. And what's important about the Tomahawks is that they just don't necessarily go from point A to point B in a straight line. They will take a kind of a circumnavigation route, so they can't be shot down. But bear in mind, these Tomahawks are at a very low level, probably less than 100 feet off the deck, if you will. I would have to assess right now, without getting any feedback from the Pentagon in terms of the effects that were achieved, what we can assume is that each one of the Tomahawks had a very good target that it went against. It was programmed appropriately, and it struck the target. Now, what needs to happen is, what was the bomb damage? What does that runway look like? I also think it's fair to assume that all of his fixed-wing aircraft, all of Assad's fixed-wing aircraft, were probably already scrambled. And in many cases, without any information, but in many cases, we might be able to find those things in Tehran right now. But my point is, this is not like Kentucky basketball, one and done. This is the start of a series of operations. We will continue to maintain a very strong intelligence presence on top of this target, and we'll be able to roll more Tomahawks, we'll be able to escalate, and we'll be able to do additional types of operations in order to achieve the results that we're looking for, which is, number one, politically, I think we've done that, we've sent a very strong message, but to degrade and ultimately eliminate his WMD, weapons of mass destruction capability, and his ability, Assad's ability, to deliver those.
We should point out, we do not know if the Trump administration does intend to have other strikes. For all we know, it's very possible they've decided this is sending a message, that they will say that this has degraded enough, and then wait and see what happens. It's very possible there may be more, but at this point, the administration is not saying.
The administration is not saying a thing about these operations, but I can guarantee you that this was not a plan that had a very finite amount of time exclusive to this particular desired end state. This is the start of what I would presume is a larger campaign that will have other elements of power and other opportunities to against other targets based on what we see next. In other words, pre-positioned forces, aircraft, and ships will remain in place in order for us to gain greater intelligence and find out what we want to try to do next. But you're correct. Nothing's been announced that we're going to do something else.
Admiral Kirby, how much information does the U.S. have about the location, the capabilities of Syria's Air Force? We've seen, obviously, Syria's Air Force drop barrel bombs, which have killed large numbers of people. We've seen, chemical attacks in years past. Is our intelligence on the capabilities and the number of aircraft, the location of aircraft, and how easy is it for Syria to basically just move their aircraft to Iran or to other places?
Our intelligence on issues, capabilities in Syria isn't perfect, as you might expect, because we don't have a large presence there. But we do have significant overhead ISR capabilities in terms of manned and unmanned aircraft, as well as satellite imagery. It's not perfect, but it does give you a pretty good sense. And because we have been conducting operations against ISIS in Syria, we have gained more knowledge and information, context, if you will, about how the Syrian Air Force, Syrian military, supported by the Russians, are conducting their operations as well. So I think we have a good idea. And obviously, this attack never would have been launched and not conducted in the way it was if we didn't have good, solid intelligence about what we were hitting and why we were hitting it, and this field and its direct link to the sarin attack, I think, tells you a lot about the certainty level that they had. So I think there's good enough intelligence and information to make a call like they made tonight. And I agree with Colonel Francona that this, if you're trying to link it to the attack and as well degrade capabilities, this was a good target to go after.
Colonel Francona, I mean, to General Marks's point, if your objective is more than just a message, but it is actually the elimination of Syria's capabilities to launch aerial attacks or the serious degradation of their aerial capabilities, this one attack is certainly not anywhere close to enough, correct?
No, not at all. This is one air base. They've got several. And they've got quite a few aircraft. And the Syrian Air Force has atrophied over the years because of lack of maintenance, lack of parts. They did get some modernized aircraft just recently from the Russians, but it's certainly not enough. that they would want to take on the United States. They're real good at dropping bombs on undefended targets and helpless civilians, but they're not really good at fighting a war. And to one of the other points that the general made, I would assume that the Syrians have dispersed these aircraft. Dispersing aircraft to bare bones bases is fairly easy. It's something all air forces practice. And the Syrians have a lot of unprepared strips that are not manned that they could easily move these aircraft to. But, you know, that's all very visible. You know, you look at this target set, this Shayrod Air Base. This is a fixed facility. We know what's there. You can image it. They can't move a lot of things there. They can move vehicles, but they can't move buildings. They can't move large facilities. They can't move POL tanks. And this is what the Tomahawk was made for. Gets in there low level and hits these fixed facilities with no risk to an air crew. So, but this is the start. If we want to degrade their capabilities, if this doesn't do it, if the Syrians don't get the message, then we ramp it up to the next air base. But then, as I said before, do we want to go down that road?
Right.
Do we want? Are we doing a military action? Or are we starting a war?
General Hertling, this administration has the benefit of several years now of the U.S. military having watched what is going on in Syria, and I assume a myriad of plans, which maybe some of them have been gathering dust, but have been gamed out for some amount of time in previous years about location of fighter jets. You know, if option A is to eliminate the air capabilities, this is how they're going to go about it.
I'll tell you, Anderson, there are no plans gathering dust in the Pentagon. Truthfully, as a former war planner there, you know, we maintain those plans, update them constantly, war game them constantly.
So that's always ongoing.
That's always ongoing, and different elements within the Pentagon that have responsibility for different parts of the world will continue to update. And in fact, it's on a schedule. I will tell you that, and that's about the most I'll tell you.
Okay.
But as they get more and more information, especially as we've seen actions with special operators in that part of the world. We were somewhat blind when ISIS started operations in Syria because we didn't have a whole lot of intelligence gathering capability, but that's improved over the last few years. We've put a lot of satellites and manned aircraft to gather intelligence over Syria over the last few years. We haven't had a lot on the ground, but we've gathered enough intelligence to put spotters on airfields, as Rick was saying and as John Kirby mentioned. It's gotten better over the last 2 years, but that reinforces your planning capability. And when someone turns to the J7 on the Joint Staff in the Pentagon and says, what's our plan for something next week? Give it what we have. They will get a bare-based plan. It won't be refined, as we mentioned before. That's crisis action planning, but they'll put a spin on it very quickly. I'm sure there's a whole lot of lights on, not only in the Pentagon, but in Central Command headquarters in Tampa, determining what's going to happen next and what they've accomplished tonight.
I want to go back to Barbara Starr, who I understand is getting some more information at the Pentagon. Barbara?
We are, Anderson. U.S. defense officials are now saying that they did inform the Russian military before this strike took place. There is a standard mechanism between the U.S. military and the Russian military in the Syria and Iraq area of operations. They call it deconfliction. They can contact each other readily, try and stay out of each other's way via some communications lines. So what we know now is that the U.S. used that communications line, contacted the Russians, according to a U.S. defense official, told them what they were going to do and told them when they were going to do it. The logical question to ask is, so did the Russians move out of the way? Tonight, the U.S. will not speak about at the moment about whether the Russians took any action about that. They want Moscow to discuss that in these early hours, but they did take care to inform the Russians of what was going to happen. So it does appear that you could make the supposition that there was Russian military at that base. The next thing, we are very shortly going to be able to show some images that the Pentagon has just showed to reporters, and we're getting ready to make those available to all of our viewers. What they have is very interesting. They have a radar track on the day of the attack showing an aircraft radar track of the plane taking off, Syrian planes taking off from this airbase, and they tracked them all the way to this area in Idlib where they struck. We learned earlier today that the U.S. in fact had that kind of data, had the radar, and had the infrared, the heat signature of bombs dropping off those aircraft. They also have some very early images of bomb damage assessment at this Syrian airfield showing some cratering and some damage. We're in the very early hours of all of this, so there will be a lot more to learn about what happened, but they do feel that they successfully struck the targets they were looking to strike at this location, Anderson.
All right, Barbara, when we'll obviously bring those images to you as quickly as possible, and Barbara's going to continue to work her sources. We've just gotten a quick update out of Syria itself. Syrian state television is reporting a quote, U.S. military aggression targets a military base in Syria with multiple missiles. That is what an on-screen banner says. We'll keep watching to see how they are reporting this as day breaks over there. It's about, if memory serves me correct, I think about 7 hours ahead. Am I right about that? Yeah, 7 hours ahead, so it's about 5:16 in the morning there. Arwa Damon is with us tonight. Also Michael Weiss, co-author of ISIS, Inside the Army of Terror, senior editor at the Daily Beast, with us as well as Fareed Zakaria, host of Fareed Zakaria GPS, as well as our military analyst, as well as we are learning little by little more and more details. And we are expecting, perhaps, according to the reporting of Jim Acosta and Jeff Zeleny at Mar-a-Lago, a briefing by administration personnel, possibly military personnel, about this operation. We heard the remarks made by President Trump just a short time ago. They're about 2 or 3 minutes long. We'll probably play them for you again if you're just joining us shortly. We'll do that. But I want to just quickly go to Arwa. In terms of what you are going to be looking for in the next several hours. I mean, any kind of action like this has reactions, and with so many different actors on the ground, Syrian forces, Russian forces, Iranian forces, ISIS, other groups, there's a lot to watch in the next 24 hours.
There really is, and we're already beginning to see a little bit of the reaction, perhaps the more positive reaction coming from some of the activists who I'm in touch with and some of the opposition groups who are, to a certain degree, saying, finally. America has finally done something. Of course, they're going to be expecting a lot more because at the end of the day, this is just targeting one fairly small facility. But this has, at least initially, generated a certain level of hope that maybe this is the beginning of America actually taking the plight of the Syrian people quite seriously. But yes, you are very right. There are so many players on the ground, and you have the Iranians and the Russians who are still going to be waiting for reaction from. You have al-Nusra and ISIS who won't necessarily lament the fact that the regime has been targeted, but they might not welcome the fact that it was being bombed by the United States.
You know, Fareed, it's very interesting for President Trump, who during the campaign, you know, and even as president, has talked about America first. He's not the president of the world. We've often seen presidents who campaign, just as George W. Bush did, campaigning on, you know, wanting to stay focused on domestic issues, but who, because they are the president of the United States, do get drawn into global affairs. This is the first military action under this president. I'm wondering if you are Kim Jong-un sitting in North Korea tonight, what does one read into this military action?
Well, I think a great deal will depend, Anderson, on what follows next, because this is one action, as I was saying, is one relatively small military action. It's quite intelligent, it's quite effective, it does send a signal, but military force is not primarily an instrument for a kind of emotional outburst or signaling something. It is in purpose of a political strategy. And it's not clear what the political strategy here is. There is a civil war taking place in Syria. Is our goal now, is our political strategy that we want to defeat and oust the government of Assad? If that's the case, that is going to be a tall order. It is going to take a lot more strikes than this. It's going to take many, many thousands of troops on the ground. If that isn't the game, what exactly are we trying to achieve? It is very unlikely that this strike itself will alter the military balance in some way to affect a political settlement. There's an argument that could be made it'll just drag on the civil war, because now you're going to have more fighting, you know, but there is a kind of 20-sided civil war going on, and to just throw bombs in the middle of that, it will get people's attention, as you point out. It will get the country to support President Trump at a moment like this. But what have we actually achieved? We've entered the most complicated civil war in the Middle East, the most complicated civil war I've ever seen in my life. And I don't think we know exactly what our goal, what our strategy is here.
And Michael, I mean, to be honest, we do not have a great track record of predicting events in this region.
Correct. And look, I mean, the strategy going forward, as far as I could tell from the Trump administration people, was they're looking to pull Russia away from Iran, right? They want to contain and deter Iran and Syria and Iraq and elsewhere, Yemen. And the idea is that, you know, Donald Trump's aspirational best friend, Vladimir Putin, could be, you know, negotiated with to do this. What I found most interesting about what Barbara just reported is if Russian personnel were at this base that was just struck, and they were at the base 48 hours ago, did the Russian military know the regime was loading up Su-22s with sarin gas rockets for the purpose of hitting us? Because if that's the case, then Putin is not only all in behind Assad militarily, but he's saying, have at it. You have license to use WMD in the country. And that, I think, I mean, all bets are off. You know, forget about trying to cleave him away from the Ayatollahs. This is somebody who really is looking to test the United States.
Barbara Starr is actually joining us from the Pentagon again. You have some more information, I understand?
We do, Anderson. I want to explain that there's a number of very late night briefings going on right now for reporters here at the Pentagon, and that's why we keep coming back to you with these additional pieces of information. What we now know, and the point that Michael was making is very key to this, very crucial. What we do now know is, yes, there were Russians at the base. We don't know what their jobs were. We don't know what they were doing. We don't know their awareness yet of the Syrian actions, but there were Russians at the base, and the U.S. indeed had multiple conversations with the Russians throughout the day, we are told by a U.S. defense official, about what was going to happen and the approximate time. One of the reasons, and probably the key reason for this, is the U.S. wanted to ensure that it wasn't going to be striking and killing Russians. It wanted to keep this limited to those they felt, at least initially, were responsible for that incident up in Idlib. So I think the point very much that we don't know the answer to is if there were Russians at the base, we warned them to get out of the way. We warned them what was going to happen. But what did those Russians know about what was going on there? That we don't have an answer to yet.
Well, also it raises a question, I mean, I guess an obvious question is, did the Russians then tell the Syrians that the base is going to be hit later on tonight and you better get all your aircraft out of these supposedly hardened hangars and move them elsewhere?
Well, I think you can assume that U.S. surveillance and other aircraft were overhead watching this, and that would have been something that the Russians would have known, that the U.S. satellites, reconnaissance aircraft, surveillance aircraft, drones would be overhead keeping an eye on this area and would have possibly, and you know, I don't know this for sure, would have possibly taken action if they saw the Syrians begin to move things around. But I think the calculation for the U.S. military was that they wanted to ensure this was a very limited strike and that it did not involve the Russians. Again, an effort not to widen any conflict here.
That's a
but
critical
I have
piece.
to, right,
Yeah.
I mean, we are just in very early hours. We don't have a lot of answers.
I want to go to Jim Acosta, who's got some new information out of a briefing. Jim?
Yeah, Anderson, right now, actually, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, the National Security Advisor to President Trump, Henry McMaster, they're both briefing reporters right now, and Secretary of State Tillerson making some pretty, I guess, pointed remarks, not only about Bashar al-Assad's responsibility for what occurred a couple of days ago in that chemical weapons attack, but also the responsibility of the Russian government in all of this. First, on Bashar al-Assad, Tillerson just told reporters a few moments ago that Assad has carried out chemical attacks this past week on civilians, including women and children, and carried out attacks earlier this month, talking about March 25th and 30th. We have a very high level of confidence that the attacks were carried out by aircraft under the direction of Bashar al-Assad's regime. Also have very high confidence involved that these attacks involve the use of sarin and nerve gas, at least 3 of the attacks. Tillerson saying we have a high confidence of that. On Russia, very interesting comments, Anderson, just a few moments ago from the Secretary of State. This is a quote from the Secretary of State to reporters just a few moments ago. Clearly, Russia has failed in its responsibility to deliver on a commitment that was made back in 2013 that Moscow agreed to get rid of Syria get rid of Syria's chemical weapons. That agreement, according to Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, was not held up by the Russians, saying that either Russia, here's a quote here, either Russia has been complicit or Russia has been incompetent in its ability to deliver. So the Secretary of State making some very harsh, pointed comments tonight, not only obviously at Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian leader, but at the Russians. And of course, that raises so many different topics of conversation, Anderson. We've been talking so long now about the Trump administration, Trump aides and associates during the campaign, and the Russians, and whether folks were too cozy with one another. Why has President Trump never really criticized Vladimir Putin or been very tough on Russia rhetorically throughout the last year and a half of seeing him out on the campaign trail in Secretary of State? Rex Tillerson really, once again, indicating a big reversal for this administration, not only when it comes to dealing with Syria and its use of chemical weapons against its own civilians, but tonight putting some of the responsibility on Moscow, on the Kremlin, for not honoring this agreement that was apparently reached back in 2013 for Russia to be involved in getting rid of Syria's chemical weapons. The Secretary of State saying just a few moments ago that Russia has essentially not held up its end of that bargain. Anderson.
Wow. A lot of big developments tonight. Jim Acosta, thank you. Matthew Chance is in Moscow for us, monitoring reaction there. Matt, what are you hearing? What have you learned?
Well, I mean, it's obviously the middle of the night here. It's getting up to early morning, and there's been no reaction as yet from anything in state media that we've seen. Certainly, there's been no reaction from the Kremlin or the Russian Foreign Ministry or Defense Ministry. We've been in close contact with them, but obviously, it's a huge message, not just to the Syrians, that the Trump administration has sent by carrying out these missile strikes, but also to the Russians, and that's something that's been laid out not just by the comments from Rex Tillerson there that Jim Acosta was just talking about, but by statements that are coming through to us from various US senators as well. Senator McCain and Lindsey saying that this is a clear message that the US will no longer stand idly by as Assad, aided and abetted by Putin's Russia, slaughters innocent Syrians. And so this was clearly a message, as I say, aimed not just at Syria, but at the Russians as well. And I think it's probably the final nail in the coffin of any sense in which there is going to be a détente, a rebuilding of relationships, a reset between the Trump administration and Putin's Russia. There was a lot of speculation about that, of course, in the past. This could be, as I say, the final nail in the coffin of that idea, but we'll wait to see what the Kremlin says in the hours ahead, and we'll bring that to you straight away.
We should also point out that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is supposed to go to Moscow, I think, next week, right, Matt?
Yeah, no, he's coming on the 12th, of April, so in the middle of next week. He was already going to be a difficult meeting because I had to discuss the situation in Syria, the situation in Ukraine, the possibility of or the situation regarding sanctions. This is going to make it all the more difficult. And what kind of reception Rex Tillerson is going to get now? A man who initially was believed to because of his situation in Exxon, he was the former CEO of Exxon. He has a long-standing relationship with senior figures in Russia. He was awarded the Medal of Friendship by Vladimir Putin a couple of years ago because of his services to the country as the CEO of Exxon. Now he's coming to Russia next week as a Secretary of State for a country that is diametrically opposed to Russia in its main foreign adventure overseas. Its campaign in Syria. Russia and the United States are now at loggerheads.
Should point out, if you're just joining us, Matthew, thank you very, very much. We're going to continue checking with you throughout this night, and no doubt a lot in the days to come. 50 to 60 Tomahawk cruise missiles have been fired by the United States from two ships in the Eastern Mediterranean, hitting around 8:45 p.m. Eastern Time, United States time, which would have been about 3:45 in the morning, I believe. In Syria, targeting one airbase, the airbase that the U.S. says is the base from which Syrian aircraft left from and dropped what the U.S. is now saying was sarin and a nerve gas as well. A short time ago,